When the day of Pentecost had come, the disciples were all together in one place, and suddenly from heaven there came a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues as of fire appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. And each one heard them speaking in the native language of each. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. This is Pentecost, the day the Holy Spirit came upon the disciples as the risen Christ had promised. It is the birthday of the church. The disciples have seen the crucifixion of our Lord and his resurrection. They have seen the risen Jesus ascend to heaven. Now, as Christ promised, comes the Holy Spirit, the third person of the Trinity, the one that Jesus called the Advocate. The disciples see and hear and feel something brand new, something that has never happened before, but that will forever after remain in the world. The Holy Spirit comes from heaven with a sound like the rush of a violent wind. Divided tongues as a fire appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them. The division of languages, begun at the Tower of Babel and recounted in today's Old Testament passage from the book of Genesis, is resolved. We read here in the Acts of the Apostles that at the first Pentecost, each one heard the disciples speaking in the native language of each. The Holy Spirit gives the followers of Jesus Christ the ability to speak a universal language heard by all, of love, forgiveness, healing, joy, and God's blessing. They have a story to tell. The disciples have a story to tell that the world wants and needs to hear, each in the language of his own life. In our diocese, we have a motto: know your story, live it boldly. Here at St. Peter's, you have heard me say to you many times that I believe with all my heart that God is making something new at St. Peter's. You have told me that you see and hear and live in connection with God and one another and with the community around us in new ways. There is more to come. Here comes the Holy Spirit. I believe with all my heart again, indeed, I feel comfortable saying this, I promise you, new problems are coming our way. And this is a good thing. Yes, the best thing. The Holy Spirit calls us to a future unknown, lived in God together. The Holy Spirit is coming. And what we know will not be enough. What we have done before will not be enough. What the problems are and what the solutions are will not be what we think that they are. And this is good. This is a good, new problem to have. God calls us to a future beyond the limits of our imagination. God calls us to a future beyond the limits of our accomplishments. God calls us to a future beyond the limits of our fears. God calls us to a future beyond the limits of our lives, indeed, beyond the limits of human life. God calls us to his future. God calls us to claim our place in God's mission of sharing his healing love in a broken world. It begins with telling the story of what God does in our lives. begins with learning to tell the story of what God does in our lives. If that makes us uncomfortable, I say to you, good. It means we are hearing something new and holy. If we struggle to stay inside the limits of our imagination, if we struggle to stay inside the limits of our accomplishments, inside the limits of our lives, our ways, our buildings, our comfort. Comfort is a favorite word here at St. Peter's, often spoken with the solemnity of a prayer. This struggle itself tells us it is a sign that these things do not fit us, perhaps as well as we think. Inside these familiar things, we will be doomed to a life, a brief, cold life of silence. Deaf to the rushing wind sound that the Spirit rides on. Mute to the universal language of healing love for us in a broken world. The Holy Spirit reveals the way. Before he died, Christ said, "There is more to tell you of heaven and earth, but I have told you what you can bear," he says to his disciples. The Holy Spirit, the advocate, will come and show you the rest. The Holy Spirit breaks the forsaken silence by teaching us to tell the story of what God is doing in our lives. It is you and me that the Holy Spirit is teaching to speak the warm whisper of God's healing love by telling our stories. We have lived lives of faith, suffering, hope, redemption, resurrection, and love. Thanks be to God. Telling our stories of our relationship with God is the universal language of love that all people can hear, because it is the word people most hunger for in the deepest places of their hearts. And so I say to you, we have a new problem brought to us by the Holy Spirit. We have a story to tell, and we are learning to tell it. I'd like to read part of an essay by the Reverend David Lowes, first published in 2011. It's a tradition of mine to preach on this at Pentecost. It speaks to this new problem that the Holy Spirit brings of telling our story. Parts of it are enduring and parts of it are new each time it is read to each of us in our own language. This is It's Pentecost by David Lowes. Lowes writes, "Go ahead, admit it. You're wondering about the future. Maybe even worrying. Do we have a future? Will our church survive? Will our children have faith? Will our faith have children? There are so many challenges, money, divisions, arguments. We're getting older. How are we going to pay the bills? We don't know the people next door anymore. Why would they want to come to our church? People pass by. We don't know them. Why would they want to come to our church? They are outside. We are inside. And so we wait, watch, and worry. But we don't know what to do. Won't someone come and help us? These are big questions, but you and I are not the first to ask them. Did you know there's a story in the Bible that is exactly like this? Do you remember? There are only a few left. People pass by outside, they are inside, waiting, watching, and they don't know what to do. And then it happens. Wind, fire, noise, and silence. What just happened? What just happened? No one came and took away their problems. Instead, the Spirit comes and creates a new one. That's right, the Holy Spirit shows up and creates a problem. They can't stay inside. They have to go outside. They have to go outside and preach, serve, care, witness, teach, pray, invite, love. They have to go outside and preach, serve, care, witness, teach, pray, invite, and love. They just can't help it. Preach, serve, care, witness, teach, pray, invite, love. It was Pentecost. So I've got bad news and good news. The bad news is there's no one coming to fix our problems. The good news is the solutions we seek are all around us. We have strength and compassion and courage and a story to tell. Our problems aren't money or division or arguments. Our problem is that we've got a story to tell, and we just can't help telling it. Now imagine one person reaching out to another, and then another and another, to tell, share, listen, love, pray, teach, be, hold, feed. Why? Why tell, share, listen, love, pray, teach, be, hold, and feed? Because we can't help it. It's Pentecost, and we have a story to tell. End quote. We have heard the story of the first disciples, because with the Holy Spirit's help, they have passed it on. We are the disciples of Jesus Christ today, in this time and in this place. How will the Holy Spirit lead us to tell our part in God's story? As you go out from this place into the week, I invite you to carry with you this question. As the disciples of Jesus Christ today, how will the Holy Spirit lead us to tell our part of God's story?